Arizona, the land of red canyons, bright sunshine, and wide open skies. But behind this beautiful picture is a serious problem we can no longer ignore. In 2025, over 14,000 people in Arizona were recorded as homeless, one of the fastest growing rates in the country. From Phoenix to Tucson, sidewalks once lined with visitors are now filled with tents. Families sleep in cars. Some neighborhoods feel so overwhelmed that even emergency workers proceed with caution. This isn't just bad luck or poor choices, it's a system that's breaking, and people who once lived just like us are falling through. People who had homes, jobs, routines, but in Arizona, one sudden shift can be enough to lose it all. Today's video looks past the desert sunsets to show a growing reality, one that's no longer distant. How close are we to losing the place we call home? Let's get started. Arizona's homelessness crisis begins not with statistics, but with what we now see almost daily. Tents beneath bridges, blankets stretched across benches, and quiet eyes peeking out from broken-down vehicles. Across Phoenix, Tucson, and into smaller towns like Flagstaff and Yuma, the signs are no longer hidden. They're everywhere. Where families once picnicked or neighbors walked their dogs, makeshift shelters now stand quietly in the background, tolerated but not welcomed. The state officially recorded over 14,000 people living without permanent housing in early 2025. The highest number Arizona has ever seen, but the real scope extends far beyond that figure. What's harder to measure are the stories that never enter a database. There's the mother sleeping in a van behind a strip mall, careful not to attract attention. The elderly man paying for one more night in a roadside motel, uncertain about the next. The teenager moving between borrowed couches, avoiding eye contact when school asks for an emergency contact. They are what many call invisible homeless, not because they're hard to find, but because the systems built to support them often require something they no longer have. Proof of stability. Without a fixed address, they can't update their ID. Without ID, they can't access benefits, fill out applications, or be placed on housing lists. And without those steps, they begin to fall out of recognition. Not just in policy, but in public memory. This isn't just about losing shelter. It's about losing eligibility. Legally, socially, administratively. They become someone the system is no longer obligated to respond to. And that is where the erosion begins. When people who once contributed, once paid taxes and followed every rule, are no longer seen as valid in the eyes of the structures they trusted. In Arizona, homelessness is no longer confined to one city or one demographic. It is a quiet unraveling that touches families, retirees, veterans, and young people alike. And perhaps most troubling, it's happening without resistance. Because when you no longer have an address, it's not just the mail that stops coming. Sometimes it's the world. Arizona's housing supply has not kept pace with its rising population. And when demand outgrows availability, it isn't just prices that increase, it's pressure. For low-income workers, retirees on fixed incomes, or families already living paycheck to paycheck, that pressure becomes a daily calculation. Rent or groceries, medication or fuel, safety or shelter. According to Zillow, between 2020 and 2023, rent in Phoenix surged by more than 40%. A one-bedroom apartment now averages over $1,500 per month, well beyond the reach of many essential workers. Teachers, caregivers, security staff, people who once anchored their neighborhoods, are being priced out of the same places they serve. But the breaking point isn't always economic. For some, it comes after losing a spouse. For others, it's the transition out of foster care with nowhere stable to land. Sometimes it's a medical emergency that wipes out savings. The triggers vary, but the trajectory looks familiar. Missed rent, strained relationships, no fallback. And just like that, a life that felt secure begins to slide. What makes this crisis particularly unforgiving is how quickly small disruptions become irreversible. Shelters across Arizona often operate at or beyond capacity. Transitional housing programs have long wait lists. Support workers, when available, juggle dozens, sometimes hundreds of cases. One man described it plainly. They said I could get on a list for a bed, but it might take 2 months, I don't have 2 months. I barely have 2 nights. In moments like that, it's not resilience that decides what happens next. It's timing. Whether someone has a place to go, a person to call, or even a working phone. And if none of those are in reach, what remains is the sidewalk. The most fragile part of this system isn't the housing, it's how quickly someone can fall out of it, and how hard it is to be let back in once they do. In Arizona, summer isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing the human body to its limits. For those without shelter, the sun becomes an adversary. Shade is rare, water is rationed, and every hour outside feels like a silent endurance test. For many who have lost housing, survival becomes a choreography of timing and terrain. Some wake before dawn to avoid heat stroke. Others walk miles to reach cooling centers that may or may not be open. In rural counties where public transit is non-existent, even getting to help becomes a risk in itself. There are people who don't make it. Each year, heat-related deaths among unsheltered individuals rise, not because they gave up, but because the tools they needed to survive weren't within reach. A bottle of water, a ride, a door that stayed unlocked 5 minutes longer. But it isn't just the weather, it's what it reveals. How thin the line is between discomfort and danger, between being unhoused and being punished for existing in public. Across Arizona, ordinances limit where tents can be placed or how long someone can stay in a park. Sleeping in a car too long? That's a violation. Resting on the wrong bench? That's an infraction. In the absence of safety, people make impossible choices. Some trade security for silence. Others disappear entirely, drifting between towns, hoping to avoid attention. And for the most vulnerable, particularly women and young people, the price of a safe place for one night can come with consequences that last far longer. This isn't resilience, it's survival. And survival in Arizona's heat can be a form of punishment in itself. Arizona's geography, wide, connected, and loosely monitored, makes it a quiet corridor for more than just traffic. Major interstates like I-10 and I-17 link Phoenix with neighboring states, creating open channels where movement is constant, but oversight is limited. In this space between visibility and neglect, danger often finds opportunity. Advocacy groups and local officials have voiced growing concern over the rise of organized exploitation networks that target those already pushed to the margins. Young people aging out of foster care, women fleeing abusive homes, and individuals recently released from institutions are approached with what sounds like kindness: food, safety, a ride, maybe even a job. But these are not acts of charity. They are entry points to something much harder to escape. According to data from the Polaris Project, Arizona ranked among the top 10 states in reported trafficking cases in 2024. Many of those began not with force, but with desperation. A missed meal, a night without protection, a moment of hope offered by the wrong person. Once pulled in, individuals often lose not only their freedom, but also their ability to ask for help. They become part of what the public rarely sees and what systems rarely catch. Even when someone escapes, the damage remains, invisible to most, but deeply woven in how they trust, navigate, and survive. The tragedy is not just that these networks exist, it's that they flourish in the exact places where support should have been. When safety nets fail, exploitation steps in. And those who needed protection most are left bargaining with their own vulnerability. Because in the absence of care, even survival becomes something people will take from you. Even when someone finds the courage to seek help, Arizona's legal and social systems often lack the capacity or the structure to respond with care. Instead of guiding people toward recovery, many jurisdictions default to enforcement. In some counties like Maricopa, there are initiatives designed to divert individuals from jail into treatment or support programs. But such efforts, while promising, remain limited in reach and heavily dependent on local funding and specialized staff. In other areas across the state, the approach is far more rigid. Sleeping in public can lead to a citation. Living in a vehicle may result in arrest. And for those already struggling, These legal consequences don't offer correction, they compound the crisis. The underlying problem is structural. Arizona's behavioral health system is overstretched. In several counties, there are no practicing psychiatrists. Case managers carry caseloads that would overwhelm any individual, and emergency shelters, often someone's last resort, are operating at or near full capacity. With few options available, police officers are frequently the first and sometimes only on response during a mental health crisis. Yet most receive minimal training in behavioral intervention. The result? Individuals in distress are more likely to end up in holding cells than in care environments. From there, the path doesn't lead up. It loops back into the street, more fractured than before. One outreach worker put it simply, "We're not criminalizing bad behavior, we're criminalizing desperation." Because when the system can't offer relief, it falls back on punishment. And when your only response to suffering is enforcement, you're not fixing a problem, you're reinforcing it. As Arizona's unsheltered population grows, so does a quieter tension within its communities. Not always visible, but deeply felt. In neighborhoods across Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe, longtime residents speak of a shift they can't always explain. Sidewalks feel different, parks carry a quiet edge, and walking alone at night, once routine, now requires hesitation. But here's the nuance. For most, the fear isn't rooted in who's sleeping outside. It's in not knowing what anyone is going through. A single bad moment, a glance misread, a conversation that escalates too quickly. That's what unsettles people. It's not hostility, it's uncertainty. A mother in Tempe said it best. It's not about being scared of people. It's about not knowing what they've been through or what they might do if no one ever asked. That emotional unease is backed by data. A 2024 report by the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission found that communities with rising unsheltered populations experienced up to 40% more public disturbance calls than those with stable housing. But what often goes unsaid is that the majority of these incidents don't involve violence. They involve visible suffering, people in distress, in confusion, or simply trying to get through the day in full view of others. And that visibility, while uncomfortable, is not the problem. The deeper issue is the breakdown in shared understanding. When support systems fail quietly and people suffer loudly, the space between them becomes filled with anxiety. Not because people are dangerous, but because they've been left without structure and others don't know how to respond. Fear takes root not in the presence of strangers, but in the absence of connection. Arizona's homelessness crisis doesn't just take away shelter. It strips people of routines, relationships, and eventually recognition. What remains isn't absence, it's erasure. In 2024, over 2,000 lives were lost in Arizona due to complications tied to exposure, untreated illness, and synthetic substances. But behind that number are quieter losses. An empty chair at the table, a phone number that never picks up, a name that stops coming up. Most didn't vanish all at once. They faded, from jobs, from families, from systems meant to help. And for many, that unraveling began with the loss of stable housing. Substances play a role, but not always as escape. Sometimes they're the only relief that doesn't ask for ID. As drugs evolve faster than services can respond, even those seeking help often don't survive the wait. In cities like Mesa and Flagstaff, recovery centers are full. In rural areas, the nearest counselor might be hours away. But the biggest gap isn't distance, it's time. The wait between asking for help and getting it. One recovery worker put it simply, by the time we figure it out, we're already behind. And they might already be gone. These aren't stories of failure, they're stories of absence, of moments when no one showed up in time. Arizona's homelessness crisis is not just about tents and shelters. It's a mirror reflecting what happens when the foundation of public systems, housing, healthcare, education, and community care begins to crack under sustained strain. Across the state, critical services are overstretched. In some counties, there are no practicing psychiatrists. Community health clinics operate with limited hours or staff. Public school counselors may serve hundreds of students, leaving little time for meaningful intervention. In many cases, it's not just that support is unavailable, it's that the pathway to reach it has become unintentionally exclusionary. For older adults or those without reliable internet, even applying for food assistance or housing vouchers becomes a maze of disconnected steps. Long forms and digital systems they were never taught to navigate. This isn't just inefficient, it's alienating. And when people give up on seeking help, the system itself loses credibility. That loss over time becomes disillusionment. When institutions no longer feel accessible, when policies are shaped without lived experience in the room, communities disengage, voter turnout drops, dialogue fades, and the silence allows short-term thinking to dominate. Policies that clear sidewalks but not root causes, budgets that reward surface stability over deep investment. In 2023, less than 2% of Arizona's general fund was allocated to housing programs, even as homelessness surged. In that same year, more was spent enforcing visibility, removing tents, increasing patrols, managing complaints, than building permanent solutions. It's not that people don't care, it's that priorities have drifted, but not everyone has looked away. In cities like Phoenix, Tucson, and rural areas such as Cochise and Navajo counties, quiet resilience is taking shape. Churches have opened their doors as cooling centers. Libraries host workshops on digital literacy and resume building. Small peer-led recovery homes, run by people who've lived through homelessness themselves, offer both shelter and solidarity. Community gardens are reclaiming vacant land, while murals in downtown Tucson give voice to stories otherwise unheard. These aren't institutional reforms. They are grassroots responses. They lack scale, but not soul. They're not charity, they're community. Not short-term fixes, but long-term reminders that care doesn't have to be complex to be powerful. The question is not whether help exists, it does. The question is whether we're willing to support the people already doing the work, not with applause, but with sustained commitment. Because what we choose to build and who we choose to notice will define the kind of state Arizona becomes next. If this story resonated with you, don't just scroll past. Subscribe, not just to follow our channel, but to stay connected to the stories that too often go unheard. Because awareness is the first step toward a more human future. Thanks for watching.